It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Formalities and smiles for Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, just hours after their dog-eat-dog presidential debate. In a race which couldn't be tighter, we're in the swing state of Pennsylvania, with the voters who could tip the balance. Also ahead tonight, a man with learning difficulties, jailed for 33 years for murder, has had his conviction quashed. A new Green Deal for Tata Steel and assurances over jobs for thousands at risk in Port Talbot. A public inquiry into one of the most notorious murders in Northern Ireland. Pat Finucane's family says it is long overdue. Plus, a special award for a huge cultural change. Mr. Bates versus the Post Office is honoured at the National Television Awards. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. Just hours after sparring in their first presidential debate, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris made a more cordial appearance today, attending a memorial for the 23rd anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. It was in stark contrast to last night when they went head-to-head on immigration, abortion and the economy, with Kamala Harris appearing to rattle Mr. Trump to the point of frustration several times. The former president appeared to be on the back foot, calling the debate rigged and attacking the moderators who fact-checked several of his unsubstantiated claims. Well, the vice president was also vague at times on policy detail. In a moment, we'll hear from James Matthews, who's been speaking to voters in the crucial swing state of Pennsylvania. First, though, here's our US correspondent, Mark Stone.
Oh, say, can you see?
The New York morning stood in such stark contrast to the blistering night before. On the anniversary of 9/11, respectful reflection to mark America's darkest day. A handshake between the two candidates who had clashed so brutally hours earlier. Good job, Donald Trump appears to say. Good morning to you. Thank you, the vice president replies. It is a fascinating glimpse into this presidential power play. Their first ever meeting came just 12 hours earlier.
Kamala Harris.
Harris in Trump's space to own the stage in a debate that was combative from the off.
But her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay. And that's not okay with me.
It prompted the first moderator fact check.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born.
Then Harris's response on this central election issue and her core pitch to every woman in America.
And one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body.
Harris's strategy was to get under Donald Trump's skin, and so she tried to belittle him, to poke him.
And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go.
Then he went where his advisors probably hoped he wouldn't.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
I just want to clarify, there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just
You talk about extreme.
But remember, that is the Donald Trump the locked-in supporters love. The question is how the undecideds respond to this. The focus then shifted to the vice president. What does she really stand for?
I know you say that your values have not changed, so then why have so many of your policy positions changed?
And what is important is that there is a president who actually brings values and a perspective that is about lifting people up and not beating people down and name-calling.
It was one example of a few where the vice president did not answer the question she'd been asked. Where she won on poise, she did not on policy detail. And this is what Trump, more trusted on the economy, on immigration, can exploit.
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years.
On foreign policy, Trump latched on to the many across the country who attached the wars in Ukraine and Gaza to an inept Biden. But Harris turned it on him.
That these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear they can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace.
And then from the debate to the spin room and the surrogates doing their principals' work.
And I think she showed Donald Trump to be a rambling, confused man.
Surely you wanted to come here and say that Donald Trump had a great night.
I think he had a fine night. I think that this was a night that was absolutely necessary, and I am so happy we finally got to see these two people on a stage.
Well, remarkably, Donald Trump has now turned up here in the spin room himself.
When you come to deliver your own top spin, it suggests it wasn't quite the night you wanted.
Why did you say that people are eating dogs in Springfield, Ohio?
True, you take a look at it. No,
it's nonsense. The local authorities say it is.
you could check it out. Check with the authorities.
It was the Donald Trump everyone knows. His opponent had more at stake here and more to prove. She certainly presented a contrast, but how many will it move? Mark Stone, Sky News in Philadelphia.
Well, in a race which is likely to be won on the tightest of margins, small changes in voting behaviour could tip the balance in just a few swing states. James Matthews has been to Bucks County in Pennsylvania, an area narrowly held by the Democrats.
In Doylestown, Bucks County, they call this the scenic stroll.
All right, I'm getting tired already. Are you?
On this morning walk, we asked them to walk through the night before. Who thought the winner was Donald Trump? Who thought the winner was Kamala Harris?
I'm still amazed that some people will support Trump after all the crazy things that we heard last night, eating pets, babies being murdered after 9 months of birth. That craziness makes me uncomfortable.
If division has been a bad thing, Debbie, why should Kamala Harris heal that or fix that?
I think because she won't amplify the break. She won't feed the fuel, the fire that keeps that stoked. I think she'll really take the rhetoric down.
This is the most competitive of the so-called collar counties, buttoned around Philadelphia. Bucks County is where suburbia swings. They've voted Democratic here in every election since 1992. But it's now home to more registered Republicans than Democrats. Republicans like Pat Galooly. The white male demographic underpins the Trump support base.
Too long still, Jake?
What difference does a debate make? What do you make about Donald Trump talking about immigrants eating dogs?
He's a lunatic. And you have to either accept him as that and let him run the country, that he's a good businessman, and I believe he can run the country better than the Democrats can, but there are certain things that come along with him. So, I mean, you either have to accept that or you have to throw your vote away and vote for a Green Party or somebody else that, is not going to get elected.
In American-made products...
It was her response on female reproductive rights that just slammed it home for me.
On Main Street, they discussed the debate and what meant most.
I have women in my life that have had difficult pregnancies, and I think of what their life would be like if they had a difficult pregnancy and they were in a state that would, as Vice President Harris suggested, she might have to bleed out in her car.
To a large extent, minds were made up before this debate. In U.S. politics, positions tend to be entrenched. For both Trump and Harris, this was about reaching beyond the core vote.
17 is a lot.
Whatever the conversation about debate night, that's where victory lies in November.
Well, James joins me now from Philadelphia. So in such a tight race, James, will this make a difference? And where does the fight go from here?
Well, I think the fight rolls on. Democrats certainly will be looking to build on an assertive performance by Kamala Harris last night. Just here in Bucks County, I've been speaking to people about their views, and they talk about relief, empowerment, taking a strength from what they saw last night. That they thought she had a stage presence and authority that carried the day for her. They are also mocking Donald Trump for this business of eating dogs, family pets. I mean, that line was roundly dismissed by local authorities. I never thought, Anna, I would find myself asking the question of a former president accusing falsely Haitian immigrants of eating dogs. And yet that was the reality of last night when Donald Trump made that unscheduled appearance in the spin room. Mark made the point that that's an indication perhaps that he thought he had performed less than he would have wanted to. And, you know, generally, Republicans aren't happy, accusing the moderators of being in tandem almost with Kamala Harris. As far as I could see, all they did was to fact-check Donald Trump, and that is journalism. But I think in terms of the Republican project at large and Donald Trump's chances at the November the 5th poll, it was interesting to hear from the construction worker in my piece, Pat Galuli. He's a Republican, said that Donald Trump is a lunatic, and yet he has the politics that Pat Galuli wants to see in this country. There is no alternative to Donald Trump, even though he recognizes the downside. And that is the resilience of Donald Trump, which is why he may yet succeed, despite how he performs his politics.
James, updating us there from Philadelphia. Thank you. To other news now, and a man with severe learning difficulties who was jailed for life for murder 33 years ago has had his conviction quashed. Oliver Campbell's conviction was declared unsafe by the Court of Appeal following new expert evidence on the risks of a false confession. Our crime correspondent Martin Brunt has been speaking to him.
I've got 9 bottles of champagne in my fridge.
Oliver Campbell, an innocent man, celebrating with his supporters after a fight for justice that's lasted 34 years.
Yeah, hold on, I'll let you speak to Maggie.
We've won. Yeah, Ollie's won.
How do you feel? Do you feel angry, bitter, relieved, happy?
It's been very hard, but I'm trying not to... someone's been trying to tell me you have to feel happy, but I'm happy, but it's very hard for me to show happy, and all because of what's happened and what certain people said and done.
Earlier this year, lawyers told the High Court that Oliver, who suffered severe brain damage as a child, had been pressed by police into admitting a murder he hadn't committed. In 1990, 2 men tried to rob these premises in East London. It's a restaurant now. Then it was an off-licence. In a struggle, the off-licence owner, Baldev Hoondal, was shot dead. At a police station without a lawyer, Mr. Campbell told detectives he was the gunman. His hat was found at the scene, but it had been stolen days earlier.
The most likely explanation for a false confession here is that Oliver confessed as the least bad option.
The appeal judges accepted new medical evidence of Mr. Campbell's susceptibility and quashed his convictions for murder and robbery. The judges said a jury, knowing of the fresh evidence, would be considering the reliability of those confessions in a materially different context. In those circumstances, we cannot say that the fresh evidence could not reasonably have affected the decision of the jury to convict. What are you going to do now?
I don't know, that's trying to get in contact with friends I've lost over the years, but that's trying to get in contact with family and friends I've lost contact with.
You've been acquitted,
yeah.
So you didn't fire the gun, but somebody did. What should happen now?
The only time there's going to be freedom is if certain authorities reopen the case and go after the person who done it.
The Metropolitan Police said it would study the details of the court judgment. Martin Brunt, Sky News.
A deal with Tata Steel to help fund a transition to greener energy at the plant in Port Talbot has been announced. Nearly 3,000 jobs are to be lost with the closure of 2 blast furnaces. But the government says it secured fresh commitments and better terms for the workforce. Some unions, though, are warning that the deal is nothing to celebrate and Labour's quest for net zero will end up hollowing out communities. Well, the deal sees the government contribute £500 million to the green transition of Tata's Port Talbot site. That will go partly towards building a greener electric furnace that matches the commitment already secured by the last Conservative government. But the new deal means the investment can be clawed back if Tata fails to retain 5,000 jobs after the changes. In return, the steel giant will also invest £750 million. Our correspondent Dan Whitehead reports now from Port Talbot.
Well, the storm's going to come, to be honest, though. It is worrying times for us all here.
Jeff's been a taxi driver in Port Talbot for 20 years. With thousands of steelworkers losing their jobs in the next few weeks, work for him is drying up.
We get a lot of calls from the train station, bringing them into Tata from the ships, so they are gone already, so there's less work already. There's not 3,000 jobs in Port Talbot going to pay what Tata Steel employees are on. So what are they going to do? There's nothing for them here now. I can't see nothing other than Port Talbot becoming a ghost town.
The final blast furnace will shut down here by the end of this month. That means up to 2,800 workers are now on the hunt for jobs elsewhere. From steel to steam, 28-year-old Cassius is serving up something new. Unsure about his future at the steelworks, he's opened a coffee shop in town.
A couple of months in, it's been a brilliant turnout. It's been all organic with it all, and people are just turning up. We just got to keep positive and, you know, hope that there'll be other opportunities in this closure.
Tata Steel says Port Talbot is losing £1 million a day. The iron and steel works are being mothballed or decommissioned entirely ahead of more than a £1 billion investment to go electric. The last ship bringing in raw material to make steel here at Port Talbot has now been and gone. A significant moment in the plant's 120-year history. New jobs may come with the greener electric arc furnace, but that won't be ready here until 2028. Too long to wait for some. 50 miles from Port Talbot, Pro Steel Engineering is one of 50 companies taking on workers like Steve.
I just went out then and got in contact with people I had worked with before or find out where the work was. A lot of the skilled workers are going to find it hard to try and match the money that they were earning down there. Yes.
Companies like this need workers like Steve to stay in the area.
It's vastly important that within Wales we maintain this high-skilled manufacturing base. You know, there's a huge capability here at the moment, and if we're not careful, we'll lose it, and if we lose it, we'll lose it for good.
The government is planning to publish a new strategy for the future of steelmaking in the UK next spring, insisting there is a bright future for the industry. But with most job losses expected by this Christmas, for thousands, the future does not feel bright. Dan Whitehead, Sky News, in Port Talbot, South Wales.
The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has warned of yet more difficult decisions ahead after new figures showed the economy failed to grow again in July. She told Sky News her goal was to secure economic stability, but some businesses are concerned about the downbeat political messaging from the government. Here's our business correspondent, Paul Kelso.
Competition, company and a little gentle exercise. There's much to recommend indoor bowls, but there's another reason. It's warm. And these Oxford pensioners are deeply unimpressed at losing their winter fuel payments.
Rachel Reeves now taking from the pensioners. Old people come in here to bowl 2-3 times a week because they don't have to heat their homes.
The last government didn't do a lot, did they? But I feel this government is more for the unions, and for some reason it's against us, and I don't know why.
30 miles away at Silverstone, meeting students the morning after a Commons rebellion, the woman responsible told me she had no regrets.
Is this really what you want people to think of as a Reeves Chancellor, someone who takes money from the most vulnerable?
We faced a situation where there was a £22 billion black hole in the public finances when I became Chancellor. These decisions were not decisions that I expected to make. They weren't decisions that I wanted to make, but they were the right decisions in the circumstances that we faced.
With the economy stalling in July for a second consecutive month, the Chancellor will need companies like this game studio to deliver growth. But they want some stimulus, which comes at a price.
You look at a country like Germany has already dedicated 70 million euros to support games projects. So what we'd like to see is the government increase the games fund so that we can take more risks, we can be more creative and we can be more innovative.
But the Chancellor's message is deliberately downbeat. Her challenge to kickstart an economy stuck in neutral.
Rachel Reeves says she wants to deliver growth at the same time as imposing new workers' rights, regulations on businesses and, in all probability, increasing taxes to bail out the public finances. The budget will tell us if she can do all of that and get the economy back on track. You can cut spending, you can increase borrowing, you can raise taxes. Isn't the truth? You are going to have to do all three.
I've been really honest that there are difficult decisions to come in the budget on spending, on taxation and welfare. After the mess that the previous government created with the public finances in the state that they are in, that was inevitable.
2 months after the election, the Chancellor is playing a long game, calculating that pay now will deliver a winning hand. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
The Foreign Secretary David Lammy has announced more than £600 million worth of support for Ukraine. The pledge was made in Kyiv alongside the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken after the pair met President Zelensky as the two put on a show of transatlantic support. Well, meanwhile, the Iranian charge d'affaires has been summoned to the Foreign Office to answer questions about the transfer of ballistic missiles to Russia. Satellite imagery, analysed by the Sky News data and forensics team, captured pictures of a Russian-flagged cargo ship suspected of transporting missiles from Iran, docked at a Russian port a week ago. Well, these images show the ship, which we tracked from Iran. A Ukrainian source told Sky News that Iran had shipped 225 short-range ballistic missiles to Russia to be used against Ukraine. Back here, the mother of one of Britain's youngest criminals involved in this summer's riots will have to pay compensation and take a parenting course because she went to Ibiza when her son was due in court. He was handed a 12-month referral order after admitting to being part of a group attacking a bus outside a hotel housing asylum seekers in Manchester. He was also part of a group filmed kicking the windows of a vape shop in this video. The Northern Ireland Secretary Hilary Benn has announced an independent inquiry into the murder of Belfast solicitor Pat Finucane. He was shot by loyalist paramilitaries at his home in 1989 in front of his wife and children. Previous investigations into the case have found evidence of state collusion in his killing. His wife welcomed the announcement, saying it was now time for the truth. Here's our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins.
For 3 decades, she'd waited for this day, seeking justice for the husband and father who was taken from them.
I believe that my family deserve this after so many years. Pat Finucane deserves this after so many years. Society as a whole deserves this after so many years. And after 35 years of cover-up, it is time for truth.
Pat Finucane was a human rights lawyer. He came to prominence defending IRA and loyalist terror suspects during the Troubles. The 39-year-old was shot dead in front of his children, his wife Geraldine wounded when gunmen opened fire 14 times. The Northern Ireland Secretary noted that the family had been promised an inquiry long ago.
And the plain fact is that 2 decades on, the commitment made by the government, first in the agreement with the Irish government and then to this House to establish an inquiry into the death of Mr Finucane remains unfulfilled.
This shooting shone a light on the so-called dirty war, British state forces conspiring with loyalist terrorists in Northern Ireland. 3 separate investigations into the murder of Pat Finucane found evidence of collusion. And although David Cameron apologised for that when he was Prime Minister, the government had repeatedly reneged on its commitment to order a public inquiry. Unionists claim this case has been given preferential treatment, but Pat Finucane's family say they seek justice for every victim.
Throughout 35 years, it began with my mum and has carried on through all of us. We have always been clear that truth and justice applies to every single person who was unfortunate enough to be hit by our conflict in our past.
It's a past that casts a long shadow for many families here. David Blevins, Sky News in Belfast.
The UN Palestinian Refugee Agency says 6 of its staff have been killed in 2 airstrikes in Gaza. The group says it marks the highest death toll among its staff in a single incident. The airstrikes hit a school in Nusrat in central Gaza. The Israeli army has said it conducted a strike on a command and control centre, which it said was operated by Hamas. New AI technology has been unveiled, claiming to detect 1,000 diseases long before symptoms occur. It could be a game changer for earlier intervention and managing illness better, although it's been released as a research tool by scientists at AstraZeneca, as it's not ready to be used clinically by doctors. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore has the details.
We go to the doctor when we have symptoms, but could AI detect problems many years earlier and predict our risk of disease? Well, that's the holy grail of preventative medicine, and AstraZeneca has now unveiled Milton, an AI tool they trained on medical data from 500,000 people who are part of the UK Biobank. It analysed 67 biomarkers routinely collected during health checks, including results from blood and urine tests, blood pressure, respiratory performance, as well as age, sex and weight. In some of the patients, it also studied 3,000 proteins found in the blood that have essential roles in the body. Milton looked for patterns in the data too subtle to be seen by the human eye. It then used those patterns to identify patients who would go on to develop the diseases up to a decade or more later. Milton was able to predict over 1,000 different diseases with high accuracy, and for 121 it was rated as exceptional. They included dementia, lung diseases like COPD, chronic kidney disease, and some cancers such as those in the bone marrow or the prostate. For a pharmaceutical company like AstraZeneca, it's the blood proteins that are interesting because they could lead to targets for new drugs. But the data is being made freely available to other researchers to develop diagnostic tools.
Today, when we look at human disease and diseases to treat, it is very much near the later stages of disease process. And so it can be very difficult to reverse some of those disease processes. The goal really would be to intervene earlier and to manage disease and to make sure it doesn't progress.
But Milton is so powerful that already some scientists have warned it will need careful regulation to stop it being used by health insurance companies or employers to assess individuals without their knowledge or consent.
Now, the King found himself in the middle of a scrum when he accepted a hug from a New Zealand women's rugby player.
Hug?
Yeah.
Why not?
Well, Charles laughed as he was affectionately mobbed by the Black Ferns, who are in the UK to take on England's Red Roses. Details of Charles's first major tour since his cancer diagnosis were announced yesterday, with the King travelling to Australia and making a state visit to Samoa. But the King will not be making a planned visit to New Zealand. The ITV drama Mr Bates versus the Post Office has been honoured with multiple awards at the 2024 National Television Awards tonight. The series, which tells the stories of sub-postmasters wrongly prosecuted in the Horizon IT scandal, was awarded the Best New Drama and a Special Impact Award for creating a huge cultural shift. Actor Toby Jones won Best Drama Performance for his role as leading campaigner Sir Alan Bates, one of more than 550 claimants who brought legal action against the Post Office. But amid these celebrations, Joe Hamilton, a former sub-postmaster, of course, whose life was portrayed in the show, had this message to share.
Out of the group of 555, more than 300 haven't been paid yet, including Sir Alan Bates. They've offered him 30% of his claim. So he has a plan. So when he comes back to the nation for help, please be there to support him.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we will take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview tonight, joined by the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Spectator's economics editor, Kate Andrews. Welcome to both of you. And certainly among the stories, we will be discussing this on the front of the Eye. Its headline, NHS shake-up, the biggest since 1948. That's a promise from Sir Keir Starmer. Back with that and plenty more after this break.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life. Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, some breaking news this evening. The dire state of the NHS has been laid bare in a rapid review by independent peer Lord Darcy, who has described the health service as in serious trouble. Well, Matthew Thompson joins me from the Department of Health. Weeks it's taken to carry out this review and ahead of a speech by Sir Keir Starmer tomorrow. So what have you learned, Matthew?
Well, you say dire. I mean, dire is almost putting it mildly. This is a devastating assessment of the state of the NHS, frankly, which the report says is failing on its most important promises to the British people. So on waiting lists, on A&E, on cancer and cardiac services, on access to GPs, on maternity services. I mean, the list goes on. It describes crumbling buildings, outdated machinery, outdated systems. It describes exhausted and disengaged staff. And, you know, it frankly ultimately concludes that the NHS is, in the words of the report, in a critical condition. But it does offer some prospect for fixing it. It's not entirely doom and gloom in its 140 or so pages, although mostly so. And I think its conclusions are likely to dominate politics, certainly until we break for recess on Friday, and probably long beyond that. You mentioned Keir Starmer is going to give a speech tomorrow in which he says that the NHS must now reform or die. So pretty strong words. And the report offers some explanations for why the NHS is in the state that it's in. The aftershocks of the pandemic, perhaps an obvious one, but it's also highly critical of the structural reforms undertaken by the coalition government after 2012. And it also is critical of austerity, the lack of capital investment over that same time frame. And it concludes that Britain is effectively a sicker nation than it was a decade or so ago, and that's put extra stress on the NHS whilst it's trying to deal with all of those other challenges. Now, Keir Starmer tomorrow will, unsurprisingly, put the blame squarely on the Conservatives, as he's done so many times over the last few weeks and months, but he will say that he has a choice: either raise taxes on working people to fix it, which he's not prepared to do, or reform and modernise the NHS. And Labour, he says, or will say, are working on a 10-year strategy to do just that.
Full coverage, of course, from tomorrow as well. Thank you very much indeed, Matthew. Well, hello there, watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Spectator's economics editor, Kate Andrews. Welcome and great to see both of you. So to the front pages then, let's see what's making the news. The Eye to start with, leading with Sir Keir Starmer promising what the paper calls the biggest shake-up of the NHS since 1948. Labour orders the biggest NHS reform in history. That is the headline on the front page of The Times. It's also on the front of The Telegraph, which focuses on claims the NHS is doing less work for patients despite record funding. Well, the front of the Daily Mail is leading on the same story. Its headline, "The NHS must reform or die," says the Prime Minister. The Guardian focuses on the inquiry, which has found that thousands of people are dying due to delays in the health service. Same story for The Mirror, which highlights years of Tory neglect and botched reforms. And The Express on this story with its headline, "No more sticking plasters." The Metro has the story, meanwhile, of Oliver Campbell, whose conviction for murder has been quashed after 33 years, with judges ruling that a confession was bullied out of him. The Financial Times sums up the US presidential contest like this. Trump camp fights to regain footing after Harris delivers blows in the TV debate. And in response to outlandish statements from Trump and Elon Musk, the star mockingly cries out for a psychiatric nurse. Well, don't forget, by scanning the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. Let's head to Kevin and Kate. Welcome to both of you. With the breaking news, actually, of this NHS study, which has been carried out in 9 weeks by Lord Darcy. It comes before Sir Keir Starmer speaks about the need to reform or die. Kate, what's your take on what we've heard?
It's a 142-page report, as you say, produced in a very limited window of time, but the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, made very clear to Lord Darcy that this was urgent, this was necessary. When he entered Downing Street to accept the job formally of Health Secretary, he was not praising the NHS. He was saying, we are done with all that. We are going to start tackling it. This is the first step. It is a damning report. I mean, there have been plenty of reports, countless, frankly, over the years showing that the NHS lags behind its counterparts, especially in Europe. But I mean, some of these stats are overwhelming. In 2009, if you went to A&E, there were roughly 40 people ahead of you. In 2024, there are 100 people ahead of you. In over a decade, the NHS has not made progress in getting better at spotting cancer in stage 1 rather than in stage 2. I mean, these are lives on the line that we're talking about. I think as we discuss this story, the big question is going to be, well, what exactly do you do? Because Keir Starmer is going to talk about reform or die, about the biggest change in the NHS since its birth. He's also going to say that he's fundamentally not changing the service. It is going to be taxpayer funded, free at the point of use. That guarantees rationing with wait times. And if you're rationing with wait times, many of the things he wants to do, like pivot towards preventative care, are going to be very hard to do.
Yeah, lots of detail in this, but 3 fundamentals, first of all, from Lord Darzi. 1, that people are living longer and in ill health. 2, there's low productivity in hospitals and that staff morale is extremely bad. 3 fundamentals we're going to learn from Sir Keir Starmer. 1, the need to move from an analogue service to a digital service, a tomorrow service, he's going to call it. Shift more care from hospitals to communities, something perhaps the Conservatives also tried to do, and be bolder in moving from sickness to prevention, which might start to explain the cigarette smoking in pub gardens, for example. So your takeaways from all of this, Kevin, because there's a lot more detail in it.
Those 3 missions are all admirable and probably where you should go. But how do you do it when you've got to treat people under the existing system now? This report, I think a Conservative government would have balked at commissioning it, never mind publishing it. Labour have gone for broke on this. There will be a lot of questions around, you've done this in 9 weeks, is it proper for a job? There'll be a lot of picking it apart, as there should be, in terms of
Yeah, I mean, he's a widely respected surgeon. He's a former health minister.
He is. He's a Labour
It's not like he
former
doesn't
minister.
know his subject matter.
Yes, but how you get there, you'll find, I think, other groups within the NHS will begin questioning, maybe some patient groups too. And so we shouldn't say it's absolutely set in stone and it is the gold standard report. But nevertheless, it's absolutely damning and is going to be the centre of debate now.
Yeah.
But how you shake it up now? I don't believe in changing the funding model. If you say right, there is now rationing by waiting list, unquestionably. Do you want rationing by income? You can buy your way in, or if you haven't got the money, then you don't get the same treatment.
Are we already seeing a shift? More people are going for private GP services,
but it's on the edges at the moment. And do you want to keep on going down that line? I would argue not. Kate might say yes, but if it's going back in terms of waiting lists have gone up, cancer outcomes are worse, heart figures are getting worse. You can't get a GP. Something has to be done, unquestionably, and it is a huge job.
But the fundamentals around the NHS as well, for example, social care, getting people out of hospital swiftly, mental health services are also inadequate. And actually, the report has found that at the start of this year, 2.8 million people were economically inactive. Most of the rise since the pandemic was down to mental health conditions. Now, we know if you've got a serious illness, you also often have a mental health condition. So the two are not unrelated sometimes. But the point is, if you don't sort the ancillary services, how can you actually reform the health service?
It's got to be a huge, holistic. It's a massive job to turn it around. I think if it needs turning around, it has to be turned around. There's no, it's the nearest we have to a national religion, but there is no point saying it is beyond criticism and everything is fine when it clearly isn't. Anybody who goes to a hospital will see crumbling buildings. You will see shortages of beds.
Well, Victoria Atkins, former Tory Health Secretary, will say that they had a massive building programme under even Boris Johnson, if you remember. Darzi...
It's a massive building programme that didn't build. I mean, that was it. It's all right announcing a building programme, but you've actually got to...
Fix a bit
of bricks and mortar would be nice.
Yeah, Lord Darzi, and the quotes here in the Daily Mail as well, says it's in a critical condition, the NHS, but vital signs are strong. Now, would you agree that actually the vital signs are strong, given the numbers of people waiting for often very serious treatments in the NHS?
I think it shows how low the bar is now. I think it just shows, what the public realistically believe they can get is a low bar. They think it is going to involve waiting months on end, sometimes for very serious surgery. And you pointed out there that more and more people are using what disposable income they may have, and in some cases it may not be much at all, to try to help themselves or their families get seen by a doctor sooner. And that's why I don't think this is so black and white. You never want a system that doesn't have a safety net for its poorest and people who couldn't afford health care. But apart from the United States, almost every developed country in the world has a mixed kind of system.
But you can't get away. If you go back to 2010, you had near record or record satisfaction and low waiting lists. And it went wrong as the report details. It went wrong after 2010 when the tightest financial straitjacket was imposed on the NHS in its history.
Hold on. So it blames austerity, but it also blames reforms in 2012, actually, under Andrew Lansley. Now, that's so long ago, none of us can really remember them, but they were...
I remember them.
OK, so go on. In one sentence.
It was to set up an internal market system, which Labour always said was going to lead to privatisation. It led to very little privatisation, but it was incredibly bureaucratic and it was incredibly expensive. And it was so unfathomable that Lansley was essentially moved aside at one point and Oliver Letwin was brought in to try and make it work. It was a complete mess. They said there was going to be no more top-down reorganisation, and they came in immediately and put one in. At the same time, squeezing the financial life out of the NHS.
But hold on, you're never going to have a single-payer nationalised system that isn't top-down. That's fundamentally not realistic, and you're going to struggle to point to any system that does. I think the Guardian front page here is really the key issue here, that people are dying. People are dying because the system hasn't been working. And you made an interesting point earlier about Labour being willing to do this report. I completely agree that the Tories wouldn't have gone near this. I mean, they were praying to the NHS, literally in Westminster Abbey last summer, because they were too afraid to talk about the realities. It is very positive to see Labour talking about the realities. This isn't just a UK issue. Western countries around the world are trying to figure out how they're going to pay for their healthcare, but it's also not a party political issue. It's easy to say, oh, well, the Tories have been in power. Of course they need to take a lot of responsibility here, but the NHS funding in real terms has been going up practically every year, apart from some COVID money. Hold on. Apart from some COVID money, it's been going up every year in real terms. It's worth about 45% of day-to-day public spending now. We really are getting close to having a health service with a nation attached. Demographics are only moving one way. If you don't start addressing the fundamental roots of this, it's not going to be here. That might be true of other systems too. But you can't be so wedded.
That actually it's a victim of its own success, as in it's keeping us all alive.
So to be honest, I'm not as convinced. I'm not as convinced by that argument in this. And this is really tricky stuff to talk about, right? Okay. But the longer we live, the more expensive we are to the healthcare service. We need to figure out a way. We need to figure out a way to live longer and to have an affordable healthcare system.
We're looking at the Guardian. You say take the party politics out of it, as it said. Darcy's scathing indictment of Conservatives' 14-year stewardship. This is in the report, right? So you take out the party politics if you like, but it is in the report. Talks about A&E going backwards. Now, it's got to be fixed because he's come up with a figure. There are 14,000 more deaths a year because people are waiting. That is appalling. That figure, Darcy said, is more than double all armed forces combat deaths since 1948 when the NHS was created.
You'll struggle to find anybody more critical of the Tory party than me when it comes to their treatment of the NHS. But the point I'm making here is even if you go back before that, this idea that it was ever really the envy of the world in modern times, simply not the case. It hasn't been good enough under successive political parties.
He wants to come in, but we've run out of time. Honestly, we need an hour on this. As you can see, there's a lot to read.
Oh, it started a huge...
We've just begun.
We have.
We'll be back.
It started a massive debate about... I think it's the soul of the NHS, the soul of Britain.
Yes. Talking of debates, the TV debate last night, overnight, we will analyse that in more detail too. Back in a moment.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of the screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Joining me once again, Kevin Maguire and Kate Andrews. Welcome back to both of you. Kate, the debate last night, I don't know if, like me, you stayed up and watched it, or you watched it today. Either way, wow, how fascinating was that? You came away slightly with the fact that babies are aborted at 9 months and migrants are eating pets. But apart from that, what did you learn?
Apart from that, there were a lot of big claims made. I think we learned a few things. Number one, that Kamala Harris was able to rise to the occasion. There was a big question around her ability to communicate the way that she did. It was incredibly clear. It was pretty thoughtful at points. I thought her answers on January 6th, she could have so easily just gone for the former president. Instead, she offered a hand to his supporters and said, look, there's another choice here. He's not handling this well, perhaps come along with me. We saw that Donald Trump has not fundamentally changed. He'll take the bait quite easily and he'll run with it. But look, I think it was a very good night for Kamala Harris. I'm not sure this fundamentally changes anything. It was not like the previous debate in which one candidate had to drop out. You kind of got what you expected, except that Harris really rose to the occasion, and she'll be very pleased with that performance. Her goal was to avoid having brought up some of her extremely left-wing views, at one point the most left-wing senator in 2019, in the Senate. And Trump didn't even get there. She didn't even have to deal with it because he was getting so flustered and taking the bait and talking about his rallies and defending his ego. So it was a win for the vice president. I think there's a lot more to this election than last night's debate, though.
And extraordinary. It was the first time they'd ever met in the flesh.
Yes.
And then they did it again today to mark the 23rd anniversary of 9/11. You know, you don't see all these people so near each other normally, do you? You know, 50-odd days out of the election.
Well, they hadn't met, but she walked over to greet him and shake his hand. He didn't go the other way, and she was the prosecutor who knew how to trigger the defendant, the accused, and just set him off. Just talk about him being boring and his rallies not being so big, and off he goes. Totally off script. That weird tag. Well, he might as well have put it on his forehead. And I think that's where she was seen to win I agree. It's a long way to go. 7 states are going to decide this.
Yeah.
But she is well in the race.
Yeah, I mean,
now.
the Daily Star's, having a laugh about it. But it is very, very serious, and there are many who are undecided. And it is said that those least informed are last to decide. Now, who knows? They might not watch last night. Massive, massive viewing figures they had. We've only got 30 seconds left. Anyway, so will the undecideds be moved by this, I suppose, is my question.
I think the big question last night is whether or not the undecideds could make up their minds about someone that they just simply couldn't tolerate. Because the truth is, if you haven't made up your mind yet, you don't have great love for either candidate. The question is, did you see something and go, I can't vote for that? I personally think if Donald Trump had managed to land a few more blows about her support for the Green New Deal, support about overhauling healthcare, support for defund the police, he might have had a better night.
Taylor Swift was the win for Harris.
That was coming anyway.
And Kate Williams, thank you both very much. It's been very good to hear from both.